So before we begin, I want to acknowledge the people of the Wurrung and Boonwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nation on whose unceded lands we conduct our business. I also want to acknowledge the ancestors and elders past and present. We also acknowledge the traditional custodians and their ancestors of the lands and waters across Australia where this recording will be seen. So welcome to the 2022 Queer Tech panel. We're going to be talking about the intersection of queerness and disability and how it relates to technology and creative practice. This discussion is part of the Midsumma and/or program in partnership with ACMI. My name is Alison Bennett. I'm an artist and an academic at RMIT School of Art, where I'm the Associate Dean of Photography. I also lead the Feminist and Queer Creative Practice stream within the university. I'm a founding member of Queer Tech, and I have the privilege of chairing this session. So Queer Tech started around 2017 as a community building project when myself and Megan Beckwith were involved with a Queer Tech conference in Berlin. And we suddenly realized that there was an international conversation happening about this thing called queer technology. And we really wanted to be a part of it. So Queer Tech is a community building project of connecting with other artists and practitioners who have an investment and want to talk about the kind of ideas that are embedded in this type of practice. So this year, Queer Tech and Midsumma, in partnership with ACMI, have focused on a topic very close to my heart, the intersection of queerness and disability. I identify as autistic, and that autism is very central to my experience of queerness. So this is something that is very close to my lived experience. But I want to introduce you to our fabulous panel. We have with us Martha Ackroyd-Curtis, Zeth Cameron, Creatrix Tiara, Erin Kyan, and Jay Rosenbaum. I want to say a few words about each of these fabulous people. Martha is an award-winning Australian writer, video installation and multimedia artist. Her work consists of large-scale installation art and formulated through a cohesive conceptual design. She's exhibited extensively in Australia and overseas, participating in festivals such as the most recent example being the Auckland Festival of Photography. Zeth is a Naarm-based multidisciplinary artist and designer. Their practice follows an open-ended creative process that prioritizes playful experimentation and is informed by their experiences of neurodivergence and gender nonconformity. Creatrix has the fabulous description of being a shenaniganist. I've got that terribly wrong, haven't I, Creatrix? How do you pronounce that?
You've got the shenanigans right, but you could just call me Tiara. Creative
Tiara.
is like a title.
Tiara.
Yeah.
Gorgeous.
But you've got the term right. Yes.
The shenanigans. All right.
Shenaniganist.
Shenaniganist. A creative producer, writer, performance artist, public speaker, consultant, media maker, organizer, activist, plus. I like the plus. Welcome. Erin Kyan is a disabled queer trans man living in Melbourne, an artist with a passion for all things strange, intense and emotional. He creates work in a variety of formats, from zines to podcasts to poetry on stage. And his work explores the breadth of human experience, from the wet and visceral darkness that lurks within us to the bright and shining hope and power of love and community. Welcome, Erin. And lastly, but not leastly, Jay Rosenbaum is a Melbourne artificial intelligence artist and researcher working with 3D modelling, artificial intelligence and extended reality technologies. Their work explores post-human and post-gender concepts using classical art combined with new media techniques and programming. I have the privilege of being Jay's PhD supervisor at RMIT University's School of Art, doing some really incredible work with the way that artificial intelligence conceives of gender. So that's quite a heavy-hitting crew that we have here. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to start by turning to the three people on the panel who have work in the Queer Tech exhibition. I might start with Martha. Could you briefly describe your work in the Queer Tech exhibition, please?
So I've got these sort of animated style kind of, they started off as sort of the idea of graffiti, and they're quite abstract. And then I've sort of used, and then I've used computer apps, and I've just sort of done this. It's perhaps some of them are kind of accidentally created.
Yeah.
But they're very abstract, and they're a bit like, I described this in the audio file. It's sort of like a bit like a black hole, but going down and sort of receding into itself. So there's a lot of coloration, and it's very much like a drawn etch surface. Mm-hmm. And then I've kind of done it like it's a kaleidoscope. So there's a lot of this sort of intricate pattern occurring. Yes. So it's based mainly on patterns. And I think the name of the video is Flaxus Nebulous. So that means to change, to transform. And that's a reference to me having, from the age of 17 to about mid-20s, experiences of epilepsy, just a form of epilepsy. And I think when I was creating this, that there must have been some sort of, I don't know if it's subconscious reference to that. And yeah, so that's really, I think, the catalyst to what created the work. Yeah, and that's sort of the description of the work. But yeah, so it came about as me wanting to work on the idea that I have behind another project, which is the Video Suitcase Walk, which is using video art. So I use a lot of video art, but I've really started to shift into the idea of using a drawing and then creating it into a moving painting. So that's sort of where that started, yeah.
So would it be accurate to associate the experience of the work as an insight into your experience of epilepsy? Yeah, is there a connection between the two?
A bit like that, yeah, a bit like that. I don't want to go into too much about what the details of the form that I had for that period. But yeah, it was very similar if you can, yeah, the occurrences that happened. Yeah, so I experienced that, and then I kept it very quiet when I was at art school, so I didn't really want everyone to know about that, because it was something that I had to sort of deal with, creating art and having assessments, and then that was all sort of I suppose a bit of stress on me there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Martha. Okay. Zeth, your work is similarly colourful, but has obviously different themes and structures to us. Could you describe your work and the themes involved?
Yeah, sure. So my work that I made for Queer Tech is called Look, and it's a video work and GIF and random generator, exploring my experiences as a job seeker with the disability employment services. So basically, as a bit of background, about 1 in 3 people on JobSeeker identify as disabled or sick, and only about 17% of people are exempt from mutual obligations, which is the job hunt that everyone has to do every fortnight or month. And so, yeah, my work's just sort of a bit of a rumination, a bit of a playful rumination on the never-ending job hunt as someone who's been under/unemployed throughout the past few years. And yeah, so in the work, I'm sort of bending over backwards and playing with a telescope. And I'm also screen recording a casual job portal. And I actually apply for a job in the video. Yeah, and also in the video, there's a really glitched out version of the picture I use on these job portals, my profile picture. Yeah, and it's just sort of about like having a bit of fun with this really quite arbitrary and laborious process. And yeah, also there's sort of a banality to it. You know, I filmed it on photo booth with my webcam, sort of reflecting that Zoom interview sort of vibe that has been going on the past few years.
I love the way that art practice can take the sort of forms that have that kind of grinding banality and bring our attention to these structures. So yes, I really enjoyed engaging with your work. Jay, tell us about the piece that you've got in Queer Tech this year.
This year, because I'm doing so much behind the scenes, I'm working with an existing piece that I already had made. I'm contributing my piece Set in Stone, which is an ongoing development as part of my PhD research, where I'm unbiasing a biased neural network and showing how it can be changed by adding new data as it's learning and as it's training. So I'm actually subverting the bias that I've trained into it and adding new data to change that up. It's a video that shifts. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, I was impressed that you managed to contribute work as well as being one of the chief organisers behind this year's exhibition.
It's been an interesting challenge doing this, but yeah, I thought that this work would actually fit in really well with everybody else's, and it would be a nice contribution to the collection. It's such an interesting collection this year.
I can't wait to engage with it. So let's talk about this intersection. And I assume you're all aware of the concept of intersectionality. Intersectionality is the way in which different forms of marginalisation intersect and interplay with each other. I might turn to Tiara first. Tiara, and the reason for that is you mentioned an affection for Venn diagrams in your bio. Is that right?
I haven't, but it would make sense. But I didn't mention anything about Venn.
Somebody's mentioned Venn diagrams. Who is that? No, am I imagining that? Maybe it's okay. I have an affection for Venn diagrams. So Venn diagrams are a fantastic way of visualizing this intersection, the way intersections work. So you've got a circle that is about queerness and a circle that is about disability, the point at which they intersect. And there's actually quite a large intersection, I believe. Tiara, how do you think through the intersection of queerness and disability?
I mean, firstly, I just want to amend that definition of intersectionality a bit.
Yeah.
I think people kind of misunderstand a little bit where it's not just about you have different identities and this is how they come together. But it was specifically a concept come up by Kimberly Crenshaw, who is a Black female academic who was initially writing it as a way to address how distinct the experience is for a Black woman compared to in both Black society and within women. It's not just Black plus woman, but there's something very particular and distinct about being in. It's like how the oppressions intersect more than how the identities intersect. And so when people talk about, oh, we want people with intersectional identities, like, well, everyone has an intersectional identity. No one is 1D. But when you talk about intersectionality, you have to think about more like what particular flavor of discrimination or oppression do you face having to have all of these layers of oppression upon you. And for me, like, I'm queer, I, deal with mental health stuff, neurodiverse and disabled, but like also you can't erase the fact that my race and my nationality affect a lot of these things. Like, you know, my queerness and my gender is so affected by like how these are constructed in the different societies I was in growing up and raised now. And, you know, when it comes to disability and neurodivergence, again, so much of that I found is often predicated on an idea of neurotypical that's not even like coherent across cultures. And so, you know, and so it's just like, I just not conform to anything because how? So I guess for me also, it's like, gosh, I'm still trying to freeze my words, but it's a bit like, you know, I just found for myself, obviously you can't speak for anyone else, but I found like for me, however I want to identify myself has a little less of an impact than how the rest of the world parses me and how the rest of the world responds to what they see of me, what they think of me, or what is possible. Like, you know, when I did my autism assessment last year, there was like sort of two separate assessors, and the one that was focused on communications could not wrap her head around how some of the difficulties I was trying to get across to her with communication was like more to do with like having to deal with racism than it had to do with necessarily anything to do with being neurodivergent. And like she got very like sensitive white woman about it, and it sort of affected like my diagnosis afterwards. Like I got the positive diagnosis, but also like how much was that just me just calling out white supremacy, you know, like so yeah, it's complicated. Like even within like queer spaces or within disability spaces, there's always this like extra few layers that makes navigating any of that even more complicated.
Yes, sorry. The cat that was banished managed to get in.
Yes.
And was causing a problem. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just like, cat!
Yes, unfortunately, I was hoping Boop would stay there for the whole thing, but unfortunately, no, the other cat came in and was a gremlin towards him, so I had to banish them both.
It's very distracting. I understand. Erin, could you, can we ask you to, sorry, starting again. Erin, turning to you, Tiara's given us a very meaty start to this conversation about the intersection of queerness and disability. How do you relate to that space?
Yeah, I mean, I agree entirely. Like, very much my identity is not the crux of that intersection for me either. It's how the world treats me.
Wow.
I've spoken several times before. I find it very difficult to look at, so there are three axes, I suppose, of my experience that are so entwined I can't untangle them, which is being fat, being disabled, and being transgender. I can't tell you what any one of those things is like, because the way those three things interact affects everything in my life.
Yes.
And all three of these things are very physical, bodily things. There's no way I can pass for a cis person of any gender. You know, I use a power chair to get around. I'm very visibly disabled. And obviously being fat, I'm very medicalized, both for being fat and for being trans and for being disabled. My entire experience is very medicalized. And I find it very difficult to think of things without that context, because I can't interact with the world without that context. Yeah, like it's interesting. And for me, queerness and disability is less entangled than transness and disability, because, as I said, these are very bodily experiences that I have, and my body is the reason I am treated the way I am. And it's interesting because I do have mental disability as well, but it doesn't affect my life nearly as much as the physical disability. Having previously been invisibly disabled and now being very visibly disabled, I find that has been a massive change. And I now am in a position where I often find it difficult to relate to invisible disability discourse, for lack of a better term. And similarly, actually, to a lot of queerness and trans issues, because both of these sides have this sort of passing idea that you can pass as able-bodied, or you can pass as cisgender, or pass as straight, and I can't do any of those things. And on the one side though, I actually enjoy that to a certain degree, because it gives me a certain degree of freedom, because when you know you can't ever be what society expects you to be, you are then freed from society's expectations. I am allowed to make my own decisions about what I am or what I am not, and what my experiences are, and what my goals are in life, and how I want to live my life, without the same kind of pressure that I think a lot of people who do pass as able-bodied or straight or cis, you know, comes down to it. So yeah, that's it's complicated, obviously. And yeah, and I mean, my art is always intrinsically connected to who we are as artists. Like, there's no possible way to create art that doesn't leave a little bit of yourself in the work. So even when I make work that isn't explicitly about being trans or being disabled or being queer or, you know, all these sorts of things, there's always going to be a little bit of that in there. And it's something I've noticed, especially with other trans artists. We can often tell if an artist is trans just by consuming their work, whether or not they announce it as part of their work. Yes. It's a very common experience I've found. Yeah, I think, and I mean, I think that's one of the great things about tech, right, is that it gives us a greater ability to engage with whatever mediums we engage with, and engage with the world in a slightly safer way. Not always, but sometimes. Sorry, I rambled for a very long time there.
That's a very rich response, and I'm going to come back and unpick a bit more of that in a few minutes. Zeth, where do you sit in this space?
Wow, yeah, I'm still very much digesting all of what we've just been talking about. I'm like, oh, yeah, anyway, but yeah, I suppose I would be someone who has like an invisible disability. I deal with, yeah, so I have ADHD as one of my main things, but chronic pain and fatigue, chronic migraines, and, you know, anyway, I won't go into all of it, but yeah, it does really impact the way that I interface with the world. Both queerness and disability would be something that is more of, I guess, in terms of how the world like perceives me, I do have sort of the ways that I'm outing myself, like at work or whatever. It's sort of bit by bit. I tend not to, like someone who has a visible disability, have it all out on the table at once. Although I might do that if it's a safe environment. It tends to be more of like a surprise, whoops, I accidentally just did something that a neurotypical person wouldn't. Or like, yeah, if I need to take a break, or yeah, anyway. So I guess it's, for me, queerness and disability are sort of a system of moving parts that are in flux, and it can be quite turbulent. You know, there are certain things that are predictable, and then there are certain things that you just cannot like plan for. And yeah, I guess I quite related to some of the things Erin was saying as well about transness and fatness, as someone whose weight fluctuates a lot as well. I guess, yeah, when I think about queerness, a lot of what I'm saying is not so much about sexuality, but much more about gender identity and expression. Yeah, and I'm excited to get into the tech stuff as well soon. Yeah. Yes,
fabulous. Great to have you here, Zeth. Martha, I can see your face, your expressions. You've got a very expressive face. I'd love to hear what you're thinking.
I think I used to have a bit of like, when I started using more and more the computer, because I used to paint. I started off as a painter and more a sculptor. And I think when I started using the computer, I used to have a lot of anxiety using a computer program. I think that was based a bit about when I was 17 and I had this start of this sort of epilepsy occurrences. I would get a lot of anxiety on a computer, actually, using programs and worrying had I saved the file, that I think I've grown a lot more confident using different mediums. And I don't know if that's mainly because of just being sort of independent and confident on using programs and developing technique, and to do with I suppose my queerness, and I had a bit of not so confident expressing that for a long time fully. I think that was partly because socially I didn't feel, I was always a bit somewhat anxious. Was I going to have epileptic sort of occurrence? So that sort of dampened my confidence a bit socially. But at the moment that was till I was mid-20s. So at the moment I have an autoimmune disease, which is a more a physical thing that can develop and comes in waves. So that's a very different thing to have. So
and for you, is there an interplay between your experience of queerness and disability? Do they inform or play against each other in some way?
I think very early on as a teenager, late teens, and into my mid-20s, I think creatively a little bit, but at the same time at art school, I would just go to a quiet place and avoid people sometimes. A lot of people didn't actually know about this, only very, very close friends, because I would keep it. I knew the anxiety if someone knew, that was very high. And only a few lecturers knew. So I would just go off to a quiet place and try and recover from whatever was going on. Yeah, so that's basically how I dealt with it at the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm trying to create more space in my own institution for the acceptance and accommodation for artists with disabilities. I think and trying to frame it as a point of strength and departure that is important and to be supported as part of the artist's creative practice. I'd love to talk some more about that, but I also want to turn to Jay. Jay, where do you sit in relation to queerness and disability?
I think that it's really hard to separate the two in a lot of ways. I exist in one of these weird liminal spaces because most of my disability is hidden. I'm autistic. I have chronic pain. I have non-epileptic seizures. And all of these I can stealth under the radar a bit. I can stealth pass as cis. I can sort of, stealth pass as not queer, even though I apparently don't do it very well. Especially I don't pass as not autistic very well, as everyone has told me. But it was still nevertheless a bit of a surprise when we found out I was, and yet it was also a huge relief. And the same when I actually found out I realized my gender identity at a very similar time to when we found out that I was autistic. And so the two are kind of intertwined with me quite a bit. Like there's this inextricable transness associated with my with my autism that's very hard to separate. It's been so important to my self-image, part of becoming who I truly am, and but part of me that was denied for such a long time as well. And so a lot of questions were answered and a lot of pieces fell into place, and I'm still untangling all of that, but I'm starting to actually care for myself in a meaningful way, and that's really, really important. I do find that as a person with mobility disabilities, and Erin, I know you've got experience with this as well, there isn't a lot of space for us as queer people. There aren't enough accessible locations that are queer friendly. Pride March isn't that accessible. Carnival isn't that accessible, and that's nowhere is accessible. And it gets really depressing having to limit everything you do. So that is this worth the spoons? Am I going to be able to do this? And that's actually a really sad thing so I feel like I'm on the fringes a lot of the time.
So anyone who doesn't know what spoons is jargon for, just Google spoon theory to fill yourselves in. Erin, can I invite you to respond to that thought about accessibility in queer space?
Yeah, look, as I said, I'm a power chair user, and when I became a chair user, because I haven't been one my whole life, my ability to go out simultaneously tripled and was decimated, because suddenly I was able to go out, which was something I very struggled with before. I always needed my partner to help me. I had extreme limitations on what I could do and how I could do it and all that kind of stuff. So once I got the power chair, suddenly I was free. I could go anywhere, I could do anything, as long as there's a ramp into the building, which there usually is not. And yeah, that's been especially problematic when it comes to engaging with queer community. I was very heavily involved in queer community, and specifically in the leather community, for a very long time. But there is literally only one venue in Melbourne for the leather scene that is wheelchair accessible, and it doesn't have an accessible toilet, so I can go to the pub, but can't drink anything. And it's a nightmare. It is definitely one of those things that I think, because even before I was a wheelchair user, when I was involved in event organizing and stuff, I would always push to make it wheelchair accessible. And that was always a challenge as well, because the thing is venues are very rare. Accessible venues are very rare, wheelchair accessible venues. And when they do exist, they're really expensive. They're very, very expensive to hire. And what that means is that those venues are very rarely used for community activities. And as I said, I've been on both sides of this, so I do understand that it being difficult, because they're hard to find, they're very expensive. But on the other hand, I lost a huge chunk of my access to community when I became a chair user. And now, before I go anywhere, to any event, to see anything, to go anywhere, I have to call ahead and ask, please, sir, am I allowed into your venue? You know, it's very heartbreaking to have spent so many years pouring my heart into the community to then lose a lot of access to that community. And yeah, Tiara has just mentioned, sometimes they lie. That happens a lot. You call and you say, are you wheelchair accessible? They say yes. And then you get there and you find out what they mean is like, we're on the ground floor, but there's still stairs to get in. Or another favorite of all wheelchair users is, oh, we'll just carry you up the stairs, which no, I never want that. Don't do that. Don't touch me. Don't touch my wheelchair. Just don't. It's very, very difficult. And it is one of those things where it is this double-edged sword. As I said, when I started using the chair, I got this tremendous freedom and also lost so much. And it's this very interesting struggle between those two things.
I relate to the accessibility issue around sound. So, for example, a lot of festival events, for example, are super loud, and I simply can't go and be around that sort of level of noise. My brain just stops working. Tiara, I saw you nodding and commenting in relation to Erin. What did you want to say?
Places don't warn about strobe lights or flashing lights or camera flashes. That I have become somewhat a passionate activist about it, because I'm very strobe sensitive. Like, I'm not epileptic as far as I've been tested to know, but I still get like strobed out, you know, like I get like very brain frazzle. It gives me migraines, and oh my God, the fights I've had with people who run events about it. I've also been an event producer, and one of the things I do as a producer, the first thing is like, no strobe lights anywhere, not allowed, bad, nope. But even like people doing photography, like I've had to explain to them, like, can you like chill with your flash, please? You do not need such bright flashing lights. You are just going to give me a headache. I've had to leave events because they just would not chill. Yes. You know, like, oh no, it'll ruin my artistic integrity or whatever. Like, learn how to not use a flash then, jeez. But yeah, no, it's just a rant that I had. Like, just I feel like strobe lights and flashing lights are like one of the accessibility things that are hard. Like, less people think about than they should. Like I am part of a project with Women Circus, that's like circus artists with disabilities, working. We were going to do a thing at like the Out of State Festival last year, but obviously due to COVID, we've had to push that. But one of the co-directors is a disabled deaf artist, and she was showing us some work from like this collective of disabled artists in the UK, I think. And you're talking about like, oh, you know, they made the show like super accessible, like the sign language and these wheelchairs and stuff, but there was strobing lights. And I was like, how do you market the show as being universally accessible when there is that one thing, that one thing? And then it came from other disabled people trying to talk about like, yes, you know, people don't make art that's accessible, so we took it upon ourselves to show what accessibility looks like. Like you just failed your entire thesis statement with that one thing of having strobing lights. Like, and so, you know, I feel like universal accessibility is a myth anyway, because people have conflicting access needs.
Yes. Yes.
But you know, but it comes from like other disabled people pretending they know what they're doing. Then it gets like even more disappointing, you know.
Part of what I love about disability discourse is the understanding that we all experience the world in profoundly different ways, and our physical experience of the world shapes our understanding in quite profound and non-negotiable ways. One of the things that I've been thinking about is, can we frame disability as a form of queerness? I want to call on Martha and Zeth for their thoughts. Martha, where are you in this conversation so far?
So was it to frame disability as a form of...
Do you think of disability as a form of queerness? Is that a valid thought?
I think I suppose it's probably a personal thing. It's probably really a personal feeling that and depends on the person. For me, I suppose I feel like having the occurrences that I had for a long time, I think that gave me a feeling of drive creatively to, and it probably maybe pushed out more creative queerness out of me, and confidence growing. And I think if you have experiences in your life that some people think are holding you back, or you know, but they can actually sort of, you can become very much a lot stronger, a lot more resilient, and you can probably be maybe more your true self than a lot of people can, if you see it in that way, more your queer self, if you see it in that way. Yeah.
I certainly feel I've become very unapologetic about my my neurodiversity, and it's something that has become, that I've used a lot of what I've learned from queer culture and queer activism to think through and express my neurodivergence. Zeth, what do you think in relation to disability as a form of queerness?
It sort of got me thinking, oh, I really got to read some more queer crypt theory, to be honest. Or, yeah, I guess, I'm not sure what I want from queerness all the time. I guess like, I know that it's sort of, asking for a response based in my lived experience, but I feel like that, I don't know.
I mean, theory is useful. Theory gives us frameworks for rethinking and rearticulating our experience. Experience is not always pure. It comes through our various conceptual frameworks that we...
I think I might pass it on to Erin and then to Tiara, and then see if that sparks any thoughts for me.
Erin?
Yeah, so I think that like one of the reasons that I think that being disabled makes it easier to come to terms with your queerness, because I think that if you are already quote unquote failing at being the societal norm, it becomes much easier to then look and go, well, what else about me is different? I personally don't really feel comfortable with the idea of disability as queerness. You know, I know I said that these things are very wrapped up together for me, and they are, but you know, I don't know, man, I've met straight disabled people and they're still really straight. You know, I don't know if I'm comfortable with that. These feel like very different axes of experience. You know, in some cases, I have more in common with, you know, a straight disabled person, and in other times I have more in common with an abled queer person. It seems like trying to push two things together that don't need to be together, for me.
Tiara, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, so this is making me think of a recent discussion I saw on Twitter where someone was talking about how, you know, the fact that there's going to be likely a lot and sharp increase in the number of disabled people due to symptoms of long COVID means that we need to start talking about like disability justice and how to like make like society more accessible because of it. And like someone replied, and this person who replied was someone who had just, like, I think had just contracted long COVID or something. And like, he was talking about how like, from his point of view, from the point of view of some of the people he's known, who's also just like been stricken with long COVID, they are like not super comfortable with the way the social model of disability has worked out, because to them, it feels like it's kind of distracting away from, we want a cure for our condition. We don't like the feeling in our bodies, and it feels like, you know, the focus on like making spaces accessible, like sort of takes attention away from like, but actually the research, the time and money that could be spent on researching for things like chronic fatigue and ME, and, you know, sort of a back and forth about like how the social model doesn't necessarily like discount all of that, but it just showed like this disconnect I have seen. Like, it wasn't just a straight conversation, but also this disconnect from like people who feel like, you know, talking about disability justice and the social model doesn't really serve them, because it still feels like for them, it's like no access need in the world is going to fix the fact that every day I feel like I want to die, or I feel like I'm in pain and I just want to not be in pain. Like, you can put all the wheelchair wraps in the world, great, but I would like to not be in pain, and there's like not nearly enough going on for that. And so I feel like, you know, when you have like people who are, you know, going to be newly disabled, really, they are still trying to grapple with the disabled part of themselves. I don't know that they would necessarily like find any comfort in seeing it as a form of queerness or as a form of anything else. And like also like there's some sort of potentially disturbing implications of like disability being a form of queerness, where like, you know, I come from a country where being queer is illegal. And being disabled, well, not necessarily illegal, it's not, there's no like legal support for you. So, you know, like I want on like sort of a larger theoretical idea of queerness as a, like sort of not conforming to societal expectations. Like, I can see an argument for that, but like as far as it works out IRL, I think there's like a lot of like more significant social implications that kind of rub up against that idea.
Yes. I entirely agree with the sort of the coalface implications that you're pointing to. That's really super sobering. The point that I'm coming from is, look, I guess the autism discourse space, where a lot of the self-advocacy movement are looking to queer activism to reconceive and reposition autism in the same way that that homosexuality was once classed as a mental disorder in the DSM. Autism advocates are seeking to to have autism removed from the DSM as a disorder and simply have it as a form of diversity. But when we broaden this out to larger discourses of different experiences of disability and different experiences of queerness in different contexts, becomes a whole lot more problematic and complicated. So yeah, I agree. I feel like we could speak about this topic for a very, very long time, but I want to begin to draw in a conversation about technology and creative practice. Zeth, I might come to you if that's okay. How do you, as an artist who has put your hand up as queer and disabled, how does your creative engagement with technology play out? What's your particular take on technology, do you feel?
So I guess, you know, to say first and foremostly, like technology is great and at the same time also exhausting. And I don't know, it's such a big word, you know, technology in general is just basically the way we interface with the world. But to make it more specific about art, I guess, I'm really in particular interested in the way we can use technology to, you know, express identity and find connection and community. But this is really influenced by my experience growing up like trans and gender diverse online, and the ways that the internet, you know, for everything that the internet is, can also be like a safe place to explore identity and, you know, thinking of like forums and role play and developing personas and stuff like that, and how there's quite a bit of crossover with sort of like trans identities and how this allowed me to explore things like pronouns and so forth. So yeah, I'm interested in digital technologies for the ways that they can, I don't know, challenge legibility and perception of the self in, yeah, what could be called like a queer way. But also I love working digitally because of the way it facilitates rapid results. And that's definitely grounded in my disability, sort of needing to get ideas out quickly before I forget them, and then also not being able to work for particularly long periods at a time. Working digitally is sort of like a cut and paste collage. You know, you can save it and come back to it. You can make mistakes and undo them. And yeah, I sort of view it as like an in-process thing all the time, that, you know, I can, you know, like a work doesn't need to be perfect or finished. You know, I have sort of different seeds in my body of work that have like a real ongoingness. And I think that that's also a bit reflective of my experiences, you know, like, yeah, I'm not interested at all in making like the perfect singular artwork. Like I'd much rather sort of get my ideas out and explore like resonance. And yeah, so that's really a large exploration, like, yeah, of why I'm interested in digital media. Yeah.
So you found it that it supports you to do what you want to do, but you've also found community and connection through that?
Yeah, and I also, you know, am interested in like glitching out and, you know, evading perception and, you know, being quite abrasive at times. Yeah, it's sort of a channeling for my anger sometimes by making works that are like crunchy, a bit crushed, I guess. Yeah.
And Martha, you mentioned that you started out as a painter, and Jay also started as a painter as well. We have this constant argument in my institution about that painting is also a form of technology. In this case, we're talking about digital technology. What's your how did you transition from painting to a digital platform, and how does that impact on your practice?
So I suppose I'll start with the photography that was still, well, it was analog, but that was in high school. And then I moved into digital photography at art school, and also video making at the end of high school. So that was sort of how that began. But using the the sort of computerization of everything is quite recent in my art practice, because I started to realize that I can do kind of like a painting digitally, and I can express my queerness in this way, in a sense, with either coloration or just references or sort of placement of imagery within the frame. But coming from a painting perspective, I was always very technical with painting, but then I moved into sort of installation in the last probably 8 years out of art school, and I wanted to combine mediums together, and I wanted to use the digital sort of painting sort of kaleidoscope idea and the I think, what was the word I had, sort of like this optical feeling to do with sort of sight and vision, which is obviously to do with sight and vision, but to use that idea in a sense of projections and that way of working to create. But yeah, it took me a while to really sort of take on the digital medium, but I do like the accessibility of it and the fastness of it. And but when I was at art school, I did study photography, but I did also do a diploma before that. But that was more analog, and I did do some video, but I didn't still have in me kind of like the confidence that I can independently work on this. I was still asking lecturers, is this okay? Is this okay? I didn't have, actually this works good. I don't need to ask, is this okay? But now I combine it all. When I put a show together, I like to combine everything.
Yes, I that journey from looking for outside affirmation and deciding for yourself what is good is part of that process of growth as an artist. Jay, I want to ask you the technology question, and I've heard you speak about technology as being a partner in your process. As a queer disabled artist, what's your relationship to technology?
So technology helped me fill a lot of needs. My disability literally led me to my art and allowed me to embrace art and find a career doing this. But at the same time, I had to kind of work a bit smart and carefully with the energy reserves that I have to take care of myself. And so technology actually helped me fill those gaps and those needs. First, I was creating 3D models to paint just as reference material. And then that kind of dropped, the painting part dropped away because it was taking so much energy. And the 3D models started becoming more interesting. And then I learned about machine learning and I started getting back into programming and I got so excited. I think digital art was made for people with disabilities. It's such a flexible and ideal medium to work around your specific needs. So I can deep dive into the programming as I need to, or I can sit back and think of bigger pictures. I can sculpt and I can paint on my iPad lying on the couch or in bed, or I can program reclining at my computer. Excuse me. I don't need to aggravate my pain levels. Excuse me again. So I can fulfill all these autistic curiosities and special interests and work to suit myself. And I find the pandemic in particular, it has been absolutely horrible. But it's allowed me to attend more events and more lectures. So much has been put online. I've been able to participate in ways that I wouldn't have been able to before. And that's actually quite amazing.
That's a super important point, I feel. And it also demonstrates that we can change quickly when we need to. Tiara, how do you engage with technology in your practice?
So I was pretty much using computers before I could talk. There is a photo of me somewhere of me as a 4-year-old in front of this massive desktop. And the internet pretty much saved my life. Like I was a very isolated kid growing up in Malaysia when I was a teenager, we moved like sort of a bit out of the way from places, and there's no good public transport. And also my parents were hella paranoid something would happen to me. So I just like spent all my time online and like, you know, isolated, very grappling with the closet doors, you know, also a racial minority, and just very weird, lonely kid. The internet was where I found my people, found my creative expression. That's how I like built my writing skills, by writing tons of Savage Garden fan fiction, and like, you know, and making tons of websites and stuff. And, you know, it eventually led to sort of indirectly me being in Australia, because I saw like someone's live journal about being in International House in Brisbane. I was like, that looks like fun. But it's like, you know, like so much of who I am and what I make has been because of the internet, really. And it's been interesting, you know, you talk about the pandemic, it's been interesting to see how the performing arts world, which is where I mostly am at the moment, has like tried to grapple with technology as a result of the pandemic. Like before that, I was often seen as being sort of this weirdo in like both space, in like both the tech spaces and the art space, because the art space is always going to be like, oh, you know, technology is like it's not real art, and like we like the live performance, and what is this coding, and you know, the tech pros are always trying to take us down, blah blah blah. And like, you know, the tech side meanwhile don't understand artists at all. They're like, it's so frivolous, and I'm just sitting there going, you both suck. And then like, yes, you know, me like trying to explain like YouTube or Twitch to some to people, and like, oh, you know, like live streaming, it's not real art or whatever, right? And then like suddenly pandemic happens, so many performance venues are shut down. Suddenly people are having to like try to understand how YouTube works. And I was, part of me was just like, if you all were not trying to mock me for this years ago, we would be here, we would be able to handle this a lot quicker. Vindication, but also not the way I wanted vindication. But it's you can still see this kind of weird resentment and frustration. And on some level, I get it, because trying to make content for the web is a whole different skill set, and you also need a lot of new technology, a lot of which is not very cheap, and you know, there is a bit of a learning curve, and like it takes a while to get used to things, and you know, things like video editing is very tedious, and I can understand why people don't want to do it. But at the same time, I just feel like there's so much there. There's so much there that is so underexplored, and that's kind of where my interest, especially, has been lately. Like, especially seeing with like how video games and performance art can intersect.
Yes.
Because I feel like I think there's sort of something very delicious about like this kind of interactivity, and also like making creative users of different platforms. Like in 2020, I ran a Fringe festival on Animal Crossing. And I got into Animal Crossing because I got stuck in mandatory at-home quarantines before the move. I went to the hotel for 2 weeks, and I lost my mind pretty much. And this was when New Horizons just came out, and I was like getting very jealous seeing everyone like connecting with each other, and I didn't have a Switch. I bought a 3DS of a friend, so I played New Leaf, and you know, it was like sort of the game before that. And I was like, this is fun, but everyone's got to New Horizon. And so literally the first day out of quarantine, I ran to EV Games, got myself a Switch Lite, got Animal Crossing, and spent like 5,000 hours on it. And then I was like, you could theoretically do a show on this using like the setup of ACMI. And so I had a friend, Maze Wallen, come in, and we were like experimenting, and it was like, oh, this is viable as a thing. Like, so why don't we try to do like a show on it? So Melbourne Fringe they do mini grants every year, and they had like a couple of mini grants. One was for like artists of color, run by Jewel Box Productions, and one was for artists with disabilities, which was a collaboration with, I think, the Darwin City Council. And so I just pitched a variety show. 2-hour variety show on Animal Crossing, right? And Jewel Box, sorry?
That sounds so cool.
Yeah, Jewel Box, David Gonzalez, Jewel Box got back to me and said, I want you to dream of something bigger. I was like, okay. And so I was like, well, I had this idea of having a whole festival, not just 2 hours, but I thought it was very ambitious. He was like, go for it. I was like, great, cool. This has become a lot bigger than I thought it would be. And so, you know, bought a whole new Switch, because you can only have one island per console. Bought a whole new Switch, made a dedicated island, and you know, it was great. It was, on the one hand, it was tricky to get funded because everyone assumed we were being funded by Nintendo. And in the meanwhile, I was so worried Nintendo's going to shut us down because they can be very hostile with fan projects. But I love the fact that we got these mini grants because of being disabled artists, because of being an artist of color. But there was no expectation that the work had to be about that. Like, they were willing to fund this very nerdy project, right? Which came out of like a game that saved my sanity during what was a very traumatizing year for multiple reasons. And, you know, we pulled off this not 24 hours, that would be even more ambitious, a 12-hour live stream. We had artists from across the world, you know, we had people jump in and out and having fun. It was kind of a small audience, but, you know, we still managed to pull this off. I remember it was collapsing afterwards, going, oh my God, I've had this long career dream being an artistic director, and I did it via Animal Crossing. Now what do I do with my life? You know, but that's the sort of thing where I see like this potential for like performance art and technology, video games to intersect. And one thing I did find with this project, and also with like this other project that we're making proposals for with ACMI, where I'm trying to make an adaptation of a stage adaptation of a particular video game, which has not, outside of Japan, hasn't really been done as much. So it would be like the first English language adaptation. And it was interesting to see how like the video game people are like slightly more willing to be on board than the performance art people are. Because the video game people are like, this is weird, but I'm interested in the IP already anyway.
Yes.
So I'm kind of keen to see like how this IP could be explored, whereas the performance art people are like, but I don't understand video, like unless they're already gamers, they're like, but I don't think I understand video games enough. It's like, you don't have to understand anything. You could just join in. And there are people who engage, yes, that I don't want to say like no performance artists ever have engaged, but it's interesting to see that gap where it's like, if you get the right IP, video game people are like, I have this one investment in it, and I'm going to see this through. But performance art, I feel like despite the pandemic, and you know, people are experimenting, which is great, but there's still a bit of resistance, still a bit of resentment. And I get that you're grieving, but at the same time, like, there's no need to be scared. Can all the live streamers, and the performance artists collaborate on a workshop where one teaches like tech skills and one teaches performance skills? I think that would be great. Someone take me up on this idea.
I'm right behind you. I want to see it. Erin, have I asked you about your engagement with digital technology?
Yeah, so it's interesting for me listening to everyone else's journeys, because I don't have an engagement with art that doesn't involve technology. Physically, I can't even hold a pen for very long without it being incredibly painful. Even when I've done sort of analog work, doing like live performance, I still need to write everything down in Google Docs. I still need my Google Calendar so I remember the damn thing is on. Like, I still need my to-do list to keep track of what I need to do. I need my spreadsheets. Like, even the most analog bits of art I've made have still been soaked in technology. And, I mean, especially for me, like, I spend a huge amount of time on bed rest. My computer is set up that I can lie down and use my computer in bed. And that is vital for me for getting anything done. And it was one of the things that made moving into podcasting specifically very easy, because I can do that lying down. Like, I need to be up for recording and things like that. Well, not everything. For the type of things we were doing, I needed to be up for recording, but you don't generally need to be up for recording. And yeah, like I've dabbled in some interactive fiction. Everything I've ever written has been on like Google Drive. And like, yeah, like for me, art and tech are just the same. They're the same to me.
Yep.
I can see in the chat people are discussing being part cyborg. I kind of already feel like I'm there, because I use a machine to get around. One of my conditions, I have a sensor that gets implanted into my arm. Like, wow. It's I'm already there. I'm living that queer cyborg life. Which, yeah, let's be real, all queer people want to be cyborgs. That's just a fact. So I'm winning. Yeah, it's and as I said, I need my, it sounds flippant to say I need Google Drive and I need my to-do app, but I actually legitimately do. I have memory problems. I can't remember to do things without them. And yeah, I can really relate to what Tiara was saying about performance people not suddenly going, oh God, what do we do in the pandemic? I got ghosted by so many people who approached me for consulting. And then when I told them like what they needed to do, just disappeared. I think they thought it was going to be as easy as pointing a camera at themselves. And unfortunately, no. But yeah, it's tech and art are the same thing for me. And yeah, I also find a lot of joy in the video game space because there's just a lot of interesting stuff going on there. I spend almost every day, I go to itch.io to look at some new weird experimental game that someone has made because I love that stuff. You know, like I'm a little bit envious of people who have access to that more analog art, like painting and sculpting and, you know, that kind of stuff, because like, God, I really want to take a pottery class. I just want to put my hands in some wet clay really badly. But like, yeah, for me, like art and tech are the same. I can't create art without technology, and I can't really access technology without thinking about art. You know, there's a constant discussion globally about what it means to be human, and the only thing I've thought of that doesn't appear in another species as well is art. Like we all, even people who think they don't like art, even people who are like not into art, they still read the cereal box. They still watch YouTube. They still, you know, do a lot of things. Like, I think maybe, you know, as society continues to integrate technology more and more into our everyday lives, like we're only going to see that like get even stronger. I'm still waiting on Amazon to get back to me about interactive podcasts, because that's something they're trying to do with like smart speakers. You know, I think we're gonna see a lot of interesting stuff as stuff evolves. And yeah, I don't know, I can't imagine the two things separately.
Absolutely. And yet so many people do. I'm with you, Erin. I can't, having grown up with computers in the house, my father was a computer scientist. It's just the tools that the way I think through and engage with the world and organize my thinking. And it's always a bit of a surprise to encounter such as the situation that Tiara describes, is when someone doesn't understand it, and I've got to sort of unpack it step by step and lead people into this space and make them feel comfortable and excited about it. Perhaps a place we can begin to wrap up is a slightly I'm not expecting any firm answers, but I want to think about the concept of queer technology, and I might start with Jay. We've probably all had the experience of engaging with very sort of technology bro culture, and so much of the work that we do is as a disidentification with that way, those kind of constraints. One of the things that I'm always talking about is the difference between what we think the technology is for and what we can do with it are often two different things. Jay, you've done a bit of thinking about queer technology. Where are you at with that?
It's interesting because I just did a talk earlier this week about AI ethics with a D&D bench, because I'm a nerd. And it was one of the things that I said in it was that you have to consider who you're making this for and who it's going to impact. And you need to look around the room and see if everybody who's involved in it looks like you, then maybe, you know, you need to broaden your group. If everybody looks like, you know, if nobody in the room is going to be impacted by what you're creating, then you need to broaden your horizons. And that's so important in the AI sphere in particular. Tech Bros in AI is a virus. And I think that all us amazing queer developers are really trying to subvert a lot of that. And we do still, there's a lot of, I have a lot of dear friends who are queer in the developer space. The trans cat girl programmer is, you know, it may be a meme, but it's also very much It's a meme for a reason. But I think that we need to really focus on subverting this tech bro culture. And so in particular for me, the NFT space is a big one. And this is a hill I'm dying on, because I do not agree with NFTs. I'm quite vocal about it on Twitter. I don't like what they're doing to the environment. And I'm, I get really quite angry about it, because every AI artist I know, except for me, is in the NFT sphere, and they are making a lot of money, and they're doing it off the back of the environment, and that's just uncool.
So many cans of worms. I feel like I very reluctantly need to bring this to a wrap. We've been going for about an hour or so in terms of the recording. I want to thank every single one of you for your contribution today. Such richness and intelligence and consideration. Tiara, Martha, Zeth, Erin, Jay. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. I want to again acknowledge that Midsumma and ACMI are partners on this project. And thank you for your engagement and intention today. Thanks, everyone.